this is Susan. She and her husband both work full-time to support their 3 children, but even with their dual incomes, they're finding it more and more difficult to afford health insurance.
How could one visit be this expensive?
Wait until you see how much your husband's resuscitation is gonna cost.
Incidences like this, combined with their anxiety over rising premiums, is turning their American dream into sleepless nights. Why can't Susan and her family catch a break? It wasn't always this way. The healthcare spending crisis didn't start until the mid-1960s, around the same time when Medicare and Medicaid were signed into law, and also at the same time that we began requiring doctors to go through all sorts of expensive licensing procedures beyond medical school. Why? Well, there's a few reasons. Everyone wants healthcare, but there's only so much to go around, and short supply leads to high prices. Normally what happens in a marketplace is that when prices are high, entrepreneurs try to profit by finding more affordable ways to provide these goods and services. The more people become involved in providing these services, the less scarce they become, and the lower the prices drop, so that over time, more and more people can afford them. This is what happened to televisions, microwaves, computers, cell phones, internet service, delivery services, food, shipping, transportation, air travel, entertainment, home security, fitness, yoga, massages, veterinarian services, and even all the medical technology like LASIK that isn't as heavily regulated or controlled by government.
What do I have that the common man doesn't? This beautiful television set, and this microwave and refrigerator.
Sorry, but everyone can afford those now.
Oh, curse you, entrepreneurs! You never cease to allow the common man to catch up to me. But at least they'll never be able to talk on the phone while in a car.
Okay, so I see what you're saying about the market driving prices down, but who says government can't?
Well, let me explain what happened with Medicare and Medicaid as an example. In 1965, these 2 single-payer health insurance programs were instituted in the U.S. These programs made the unfortunate less dependent on impartial private charities and more dependent on political institutions and pharmaceutical companies. On top of that, these programs consistently require tax increases, and because they function more to satisfy the healthcare industry than the worker, they continually lead to more expensive and wasteful ways of treating patients. As a result, prices continually rise, making it more difficult for people like Susan and her family to afford health insurance. Not only that, but in 1965, the government also took over the training of new doctors, and in 1997, they limited the number of new doctors they would train at 110,000 per year, and the number hasn't changed since. Even worse, our government won't let migrant doctors from developed Western countries practice in the U.S. without undergoing this training. As a result, experienced doctors from other countries are less likely to want to practice medicine in the U.S. This contributes to the scarcity of doctors, making healthcare even more expensive.
Well, I see that those programs didn't work as intended, but I'm sure Obamacare will. Won't that solve the problem?
Unfortunately, Obamacare suffers from similar problems. It eliminated the pricing structure by seriously restricting competition because all providers have to offer the same kinds of plans at the same price. And because the price isn't really determined by the market, providers can charge the taxpayer way more than they could have otherwise. It's basically just a handout to the big insurance companies.
I guess people like me just can't catch a break.
But it doesn't have to be this way. If we get the government out of healthcare, more people like Susan will be able to get the care they need. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video and want to learn more about the topic, please check out fee.org for more content. Thank you so much. Is being PC the same as being polite? As someone who fights on the side of free speech, I'm the first to tell you, we do have a tendency to strawman political correctness. You may have heard things like, "Damn snowflakes just don't want to be fanded," or, "They want to suppress the truth, man." And though I agree in PC culture's worst form, all these things are true. Those aren't the actual arguments they make. So let me arm you with the intellectual tools you need to successfully contribute to this discussion. And if you're PC, listen with an open mind, and maybe I can change it. One argument that's actually made is that political correctness is just a boogeyman term invented to lash out against polite society without seeming crude or uncivil. That what we call political correctness is actually just politeness, and we simply don't want to be polite. But this is just plain wrong. There's a difference between being PC and being polite, and I can prove it. Let's look at an example. Jim and Jill. Jill doesn't like racist humor because it offends others and because she doesn't want to be a jerk. Jill is polite. Jim doesn't like racist humor because he believes that problematic social attitudes inadvertently contribute to the upholding of systemic power structures that strengthen systemic bigotry and subconsciously influence us to commit acts of violence. What? Let me break it down. Jim believes when you say bad words, you contribute to negative social attitudes, which cause others to commit acts of violence. For example, trans people have a high suicide rate. When you question modern gender theory, misgender someone, or commit another similar microaggression, you contribute to a culture which marginalizes non-gender conforming people and increases their suicide rate. This may sound convincing, until you realize this logic can be applied to any group if you're willing to make the same kinds of assumptions. Veterans and soldiers have a very high suicide rate and aren't well cared for, but we can still criticize US foreign policy and military action. We even burn flags. Young men have a very high suicide rate as well. Shouldn't male bashing be a hate crime? We can do all the same mental gymnastics to make either case, and whether or not you're taken in by them, it's clear that the motivations for being PC and just being polite are different. Jill doesn't want to upset or alienate anyone with her use of language. Jim believes that stumbling across the improper uses of language is tantamount to violence. Jill is a nice person. Jim is an ideologue. Jill is polite. Jim is PC.
I'm polite.
And I'm PC, okay. You know, there's no difference between us, really.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I want people to be polite, but I don't want to ban impolite speech.
Neither do I. That's just an insane strawman argument. Name one country where PC people have gotten any forms of speech banned.
You mean besides Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Croatia, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Sweden, Switzerland?
Don't be PC. Be polite. We would like 2 lemonades, please.
That'll be 50 cents.
50 cents? I ain't paying no 50 cents for no lemonade. You expect us to pay for this?
Well,
Of course she does.
But we have a right to drink lemonade. It's our God-given right, Billy.
The word right is thrown around a whole lot these days. Whether it's the right to freedom of speech, the right to own a gun, the right to use birth control, the right to healthcare, or any other thing we're told we're entitled to. Some people seem to think they have a right to just about anything and everything. So what is a right?
well,
It means you get to do something.
Well, sort of. Rights are a moral concept that define the expectations and responsibilities we all have towards each other, based on the idea that every individual person's life, choices, and property are their own. They're not something that governments can give out to people, but something people are born with and that any good government shouldn't be allowed to take away.
which...
Who said anything about the government? I ain't talking about no government. I just want some free lemonade.
Well, yeah, but the only way that you can get something for free that somebody else doesn't want to give away is to either have the government take it from them or just steal it. But I repeat myself.
Hello, 911? Yes, I have a little girl refusing to give me free lemonade from her lemonade stand. Hello? What are my taxes paying for?
See, if you have a right to the product of her labor, that means she had to go through the process of creating it without being compensated.
What? Well, why not just have taxes pay for it? That way she gets compensated for making a lemonade and I get lemonade without having to buy it. Everybody wins.
Yeah, but then you're just taking money from someone else who wasn't even involved in the transaction and doesn't get anything in return. And besides, it's her lemonade. She might not even want to sell it to you.
Yeah,
Oh, next you're gonna be saying that people should get to decide what happens with their own stuff?
Yeah. No one's saying you don't have a right to drink whatever you want, but that's not the same as saying you have a right to just take other people's stuff. For example, no one told you that you couldn't get plastic surgery, but you still have to find a way to pay for those butt implants yourself.
You said you would never tell.
hey, anything we consider to be a human right has to be universal and equal for everyone. And that means whatever treatment you think you're entitled to from others should be something you're prepared to respect for them in return. A right to life means it's never okay to murder or assault anyone else. A right to liberty means everybody gets to say and do what they want as long as they don't try to stop someone else from being able to do the same. A right to property, means nobody steals from each other and everybody gets to decide for themselves what to do with their stuff. If they don't want to trade with you or give you their property voluntarily, you don't just get to take it away. But your supposed right to my lemonade is just another way of saying you think you have the moral authority to take my stuff.
What are you trying to say here?
Give me my 50 cents, jerk.
Human rights don't really mean anything if they aren't equal for all people. But when we all agree to respect other people's rights, we get to live in a society that's stable, peaceful, and increasingly prosperous. And who wouldn't want that? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want more material like it, check out fee.org. Since I was a little kid, I've always loved politics. A few days after I first learned where my family stood on the most pressing issues of the day, I asked my mother a simple question. Mom, are we right about everything? Yes. We weren't. I mean, most things, we were right about most things, but there are a few positions my family held which I no longer agree with, which means they were wrong about them. Or does it mean I'm wrong about them? Or maybe we're both wrong about them? I came from a conservative Irish Catholic home, but I went to a primary school with students from all sorts of different backgrounds. And we were engaging in dialogue constantly. Yeah, I know most kids aren't interested in politics per se, but we all hold strong opinions from an early age and spend a good deal of time defending those views from others. So if we know children can handle exposure to adversarial ideas, why do we insist on protecting college students from them?
I believe letter A is the best.
I believe letter A is the best as well. I like the letter B. As the dean of your university, it has come to my attention that you're making the other students feel unsafe on campus.
What? I'm making them feel unsafe? You son of a...
See, a few college administrators seem to believe that hearing new points of view can be unsafe or damaging to students on a theoretical level. Ironically, this kind of thinking can actually put people holding whatever view is being demonized in real danger.
You've yet to give a good reason why someone should support your position.
Because I'm not allowed to.
Why should you be?
It's an interesting question. Let's imagine he could freely express his views to others. There would be 3 basic potential outcomes.
Wow, I hadn't considered that. I guess I support B now. Wow, I hadn't considered that. I still support A, but not as much as I used to, or not for the same reasons. Wow, I hadn't considered that. I still completely disagree. Here's why.
As you may have noticed, every one of these outcomes increases people's understanding of the world and each other's perspectives, and no one got beat up. In the end, there are only 2 possible ways of confronting disagreement: talking it through, or one party forcing the other to conform. But then again, who knows? Can you trust any of what I'm saying? I did mention at the beginning of the video that I'm not so sure that I'm right about everything. Maybe I'm completely full of it. Maybe I'm just a little bit full of it. Maybe we're all a little bit full of it, and we have some bad ideas that need airing so that we can test their validity on others. And maybe the only way we can get to the truth is by being able to discuss all ideas. The belief in freedom of expression isn't just a single ideal, it's the single most important ideal for the functioning of our society. It's the very cornerstone of our search for truth. And if we remove this cornerstone, no matter how good our intentions might be, everything else falls. So let's keep it in place and keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video and want to learn more about the topic, please check out fee.org for more content. Thank you so much.
Oh, golly, I just can't go on living, I tell you what.
Oh no, what's wrong, sir?
The world would be better off without me. I'm selfish. I've done nothing for the poor.
Why would you say that?
I don't work for the government.
Come again? According to your record, you've done all sorts of good things for the community. Volunteered at soup kitchens, cleaned up litter, looked after family and friends. You even ran a small business which employed people. I'd say you've had a pretty positive impact.
But I'd have been able to do so much if I had just worked for a government agency. It's true. You'll never be as good a person as me.
I don't know about that. What if the best way to contribute to the well-being of the community is without government?
Oh, golly, this is where I used to help feed the needy.
Sure is, and you did a whole lot better than some public agency ever could. Volunteering for private charities is a great way for community members to help one another. Isn't that the best feeling in the world?
It sure is. One of the most meaningful and personal things there is to feel.
That's right, and a lot of times, government programs that seek to help the poor create an ineffective and impersonal environment where it's impossible to put a face to who's helping you and who's being helped. But charity is most successful when it's personal. 71% of all contributions to charity are from private individuals, and that number rises to 80% if you include all the money the deceased have left to charities in their will.
But private individuals are greedy. The only way we can really act as a community is through government.
Nope. In fact, this last year in the US, charitable donations exceeded $390 billion, which is an all-time high.
But the government spends roughly $1 trillion on the war on poverty every year. How can the market compete?
How did you know that? Who just knows that? You have a lot of statistics. It's okay, I do too. Government programs are far less effective than private charities, not only for the reasons laid out earlier, but because roughly 70% of all money budgeted for government assistance gets spent upholding and maintaining the bureaucracies charged with the task of helping the poor. When you pay taxes for the war on poverty, it's more likely that your money will end up in the pocket of a middle-class public sector worker than with a poor person in need.
Well, that doesn't sound good for the community at all. They really only end up spending 30% of all the money they receive on the poor?
Yep. Now compare that to private charities, which only spend 30% on infrastructure and employees and the other 70% on the poor.
Well, gosh. It's almost as if communities will care for their own without being forced by the government. I guess I am helping the community, and I shouldn't jump off this bridge.
No, people are bad at heart. You can't trust them to help each other on their own. You should jump off the bridge. You should jump off the bridge and you should do a backflip.
This guy. Well, it's true that people are sometimes greedy, but if that's the case, what's to prevent individuals operating from within the state system from being greedy themselves? Politicians are people too, you know.
That's a good point.
At the end of the day, every community is its own unique, complex ecosystem which knows best how to fulfill its own needs. And most importantly, community is, by definition, voluntary. You can't really force someone to be a part of your community through laws and regulations.
Well, gosh, I guess you're right. When I help the community, I do so because I care about those around me. Not because the government bullied me into doing so.
No, you fools! There are so many people who need your help. I mean, what kind of people would you be if you didn't contract bureaucrats hundreds of miles away to do the work for you?
Good members of the community.
Hey folks, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please check out fee.org for similar content and more information.
In Venezuela, we are not in a civil war. We are a war against civilians. We are fighting on the streets just with a flag and just with a slogan. And they are throwing bullets at us. They're trying to make silence in Venezuela, killing everyone who disagrees with them. I began involved in politics when I was 16 years old. I began involved because I wanted to make a change. I saw the poverty in my country. I wanted to help them. When I went to the public sector, I saw the inefficiency of the public sector as well. Then someone recommended me a book from Hayek. And when I read this book, I saw the light. You are just one generation away of lose your liberty. And that's what happened in Venezuela. Just to give you an example, in the 1970s, Venezuela was the 20th richest country in the world. Our GDP was only 13% down the United Kingdom. So Venezuela was a country with opportunities and was a country with freedom for everyone. But right now, in the economic freedom ranking, we are second to last, just after North Korea. In Venezuela in the 1970s, the government started adopting socialist economic policies that deteriorate the economy. In 1975, they nationalized all mining. In 1976, they nationalized the oil industry. That, combined to interventionist policies, create the huge mess that we have in Venezuela. However, the real problem began when Chavez rose to power. He rose to power because people feel a lot of disappointment in the traditional political parties and their promises. Chavez rose to power in 1999, and after that he began adopting policies against private property, against entrepreneurship, and against everyone who really wants to help and improve their lives. I come from a very poor country. However, those people are in more poverty now because of the policies of Chavez. 82% of our people are in poverty, 58% in extreme poverty, and 6 out of 10 people don't eat 3 times per day. Socialism is about force, about dependency on the state, and repression, brutal repression. In Venezuela, we have been protesting for more than 100 days this year, in a row. More than 100 students have been killed, 4,000 are in jail right now, just because they want a better country. And that's something that we are fighting against, and that's a risk that we are taking right now, because for us, we need to fight. We want a free country, we want a free economy, and we want freedom to create opportunities for our families. Our people are not on the streets because they demand more benefits or subsidies. No, because we want freedom. Right now, our people are living in misery because of socialism. Right now in Venezuela, we don't have media outlets to express ourselves. Right now in Venezuela, we don't have food in our supermarkets. Right now in Venezuela, we have a violent murder every 20 minutes. That's what socialism is about, and we understood that. In Venezuela, we have something unique. We have a movement, a social movement, not promoted by the political parties, but from the people, just demanding one thing, and it's freedom. The basic thing that we need to grow and to rebuild our country. I encourage everyone at my university, at my community, and to everyone I know to defend liberty, to defend our ideas. Why? Because I'm someone who comes from a country in which we lost our liberty, and we are trying to reconquer it, fighting on the streets and risking our lives. You can fight here for your liberty, debating. You can fight for your liberty here, talking to others, talking to your community, and that's something that I encourage you. For me, it's so important because for me, it's personal. I'm someone who is telling to you that I lost my freedom, because when you are in a country like mine, in which you cannot express what you want to express, in which you cannot talk what you want to talk, and you cannot prosper the way you want to prosper, you are not free. And here that you have that, please fight for that, and please help us in this fight.
Think about this digital disruption that's changing a lot of industries right now. It changed the taxi industry with Uber. It changed the hotel industry with Airbnb. And, let's talk about this. Here's a slide that'll put it in perspective. It took 38 years for radio to get to 50 million listeners, TV 13 years to 50 million viewers, the internet 4, the iPod 3, Facebook 2. But the Pokemon Go app got to 50 million downloads in 15 days. Right? How about that? Now, wait till you see the next slide. Billboard said that Ed Sheeran got 375 million downloads in 1 week. That is amazing. Do you think the world's moving a little faster now? Let me hear it. Yes? Yeah, absolutely, right? The world is changing so fast.
Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers. How you doing this week, Ant?
Well, I'm well, James, and we're coming up on the start of a new school year, so it's probably appropriate that we talk about something like school choice.
School choice, you say? Crazy. I hear that school choice is so problematic that no rational person anywhere would ever consider engaging in the practice. I hear this mostly from the teachers' unions.
Yeah, and it's interesting given the tremendous number of people in this country that send their kids not just to private schools, but who choose to homeschool also.
Yeah, no, that's right. In point of fact, we already have school choice. We just have it on a very limited scale, and the limitation, more or less, right, it breaks right along income lines. Right, because people who are pretty well heeled can afford to send their children to private school, and here you've got either some sort of non-secular or even Catholic school. They can choose to homeschool their children. They've got a number of options that are open to them by virtue of their wealth.
Right.
Whereas people who are working class, even lower middle class, and certainly the poor, have no options whatsoever, right? They're sending their children to the government school in the district in which they reside.
Yeah, and that it's interesting when you say that, because really, when we debate school choice, we're really not debating whether we should have school choice. What we're debating is whether poor people should have school choice. So, for years it's been the case that, if you're, upper middle class or a rich person, you can choose kind of with impunity what public school district you're going to be in, just by choosing to live here versus there. So those people have school choice. And now there are reports of, in some areas, in more affluent communities within a school district, parents banding together and petitioning to form a new school district within the larger school district. So again, you have school choice.
Right. The real surprise here isn't that people angle to get the best education for their children that they can. Of course they do. And they really always have. The real question here, as I see it, is how far down the income scale is this privilege of school choice going to go, right? Because the rich have they've always had this, right? As is the case with most privileges that we could speak of. People who are very well off enjoy a number of privileges the rest of us don't get. But when we start thinking about things like public school and how far a privilege should extend into that realm, now we've got a relatively thorny issue, right? Because our knee-jerk response is to say, invariably, everybody should have that privilege to the extent that it's possible to grant it. And yet there are powerful interests lined up against that sort of thing happening.
Yeah, and I think the argument might even be stronger than that. I guess there are a lot of people, and myself included, who might argue, even if private school were more expensive, and even if it provided a lower quality education, it seems right that the parents should be the ultimate arbiters, ultimate deciders of where the children go to school. To say that the child must go to a state-sponsored school takes this decision-making out of the hands of the parents and puts it into the hands of the bureaucrats. So even if private schools were more expensive and provided worse outcomes, I'm still not convinced there's a compelling argument for public school there. But it turns out, if you look at the numbers, it's actually the reverse. The private schools tend to perform as well or better, and for significantly lesser cost.
Well, they kind of have to, what with market forces being arrayed against them and all. If they don't perform well, they simply go out of business.
And there's an interesting dynamic, the difference between the incentives of the public school versus the private school. In the private school, if they don't deliver quality, or they deliver the quality at too high of a price, what happens is parents go away. And so there's pressure constantly on the private school system to reduce cost, improve quality. But think about the dynamic in the public school system. In the public school system, you're actually rewarded for doing a worse job. Because when the students aren't hitting whatever targets they have, it's easy to turn to politicians and say, well, the problem is we're simply not spending enough money.
Right. It's always a resource problem. It's never a performance problem. But I fear that I'm going to have to throw a bunch of cold water on you right now, because you seem to be getting a little ahead of yourself when you say these crazy things like, I don't think it should matter. Because we all know that we live in a deeply constrained world. Right? The world is constrained, and we have to operate within those constraints. Otherwise, we're no better than those people who declare how things should be and then just expect that it will happen. And look, the world doesn't work that way. We have to work with the constraints that are before us. And I think that means here that the best we can hope to do is maybe offer an idea or two which will make the world less constrained, right? It's not that we're claiming that we have a perfect answer of any kind here. Surely we don't. But we probably could come up with a better answer here. And that's always my first goal, right? What's better, what's worse, and how can we move towards the one and turn our backs to the other? So what would be better here, and how might we get to what's better?
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because when you talk about school choice, of course, people's thoughts immediately go to public money going to private schools, and some people lose their minds about this. But the conversation doesn't have to go there. We can talk about school choice strictly within the confines of a public school system. That is, you can have school choice if you let the tax dollars follow the student, and let the student choose from amongst public schools, that are in his area, rather than saying, if you live in this particular house, you must go to this particular public school. If you do that, and still we're within the confines of a public school system, if you do that, you create the same competitive incentives amongst the different public schools that exist amongst the private schools. That is, they've got to perform better and at lower cost in order to attract the tax dollars.
Right, and I think this is actually bordering on the incredibly interesting, right? Because it takes the system as we find it, and it doesn't introduce any new variables, no new schools, no new teachers, just the ones that are already there being supported by the public in the form, generally speaking, of their property taxes, right? And it says something like, look, these are your options. And your options can stretch further and wider than they ever have before, but these are your options. So choose wisely. Now, understand we're going to have transport problems here, right? And the arguments about which students are entitled to take which buses these things are all going to come up later. And let's just casually, as economists do, assume those problems away and deal with the one thing. And that's introducing market forces into a system which has been wholly resistant to market forces of any kind for as long as anyone can remember. And it seems to me that if we did this one simple thing, the people themselves, they all seem to know which schools are better and which are worse. Right? Everybody seems to know this. Yeah, it's no real mystery here. So before you know it, right, before long, we would end up in a situation where the schools that were performing well would be turning people away, and the schools that were underperforming wouldn't be able to fill their seats. And that would be indicative of a certain kind of health in a market where I come from. And I'd really like to see this sort of thing, right? And notice what we haven't done here. Private schools, parochial schools, religion doesn't become an issue. We're only looking at public schools. So why on earth, if this is so simple that two idiots like us can come up with this idea in the space of 9 minutes and 52 seconds, why has nobody tried this?
Yeah, well, so it goes all back to incentives. There's a tremendous incentive amongst the educational bureaucracy to maintain the system as it is. Currently, everyone from the administration to the teachers' unions are not required to put their product in front of consumers who can choose to decline it. Instead, they just turn to politicians and say, we need more money, tax those people and hand it to us. I've had this conversation with a number of people in the past, and what's interesting to me is the response I get often is, yeah, but you can't do education like that. Education is a different product. We can't submit it to the vagaries of the market forces. And I point people's attention to the way we handle food for the poor. We have food stamps, right? So what happens is the government taxes, and if you're poor, it gives you food stamps. And what do you do with these food stamps? You go to a grocery store and you spend them. There's no restriction on what sort of grocery store you can go to. The government does not produce food itself, and you don't have to go to a government run and managed grocery store to buy your groceries. You just go to the private sector. And it's a fascinating combination of public and private, where the government is doing the taxing and handing out of vouchers. That's what food stamps are. And we leave it to the market to produce the product. And people just choose what the best product is and spend their money appropriately. And when you start to think of it that way, vouchers are for education very much what food stamps are for food.
Yeah, no, and you start to wonder what people who believe that market forces have no place in education, you start to wonder what magic they think happens between the senior year of high school and the freshman year of college, where all of a sudden market forces do have something to say about the delivery of an education, right? Because market forces are very clearly at work in the higher education market. And
well, they are, and it's worth noting that higher education is consistently one of the top 5 or 10 exports of the United States. Foreigners, we're so good at higher education that foreigners come here and spend their money to get higher education from the United States. You don't hear that happening at primary and secondary schools. And the major difference is one is directed by markets and the other one isn't.
Right, and for all of the criticisms we level at higher education in America, and there are quite a few, and they are legitimate, the American higher educational system is still the gold standard globally. And it's precisely because market forces prevail there. And we accept that without a whole lot of argument. Why we refuse to accept that K through 12 for everybody except those who are rich enough to involve themselves in market forces, I will never quite understand.
So it's worth, we call this words and numbers, so it's worth stating a couple of numbers because I looked them up prior to this conversation. The average cost of public education in the United States per student, primary and secondary school, is $13,000. And that ranges from a high of over $20,000 in New York State to a low of under $7,000 per student in your home state of Utah. Now that's public education, $13,000 per student. Private education, we normally associate that with, the well-to-do schools, but those are a small minority. The average private high school or primary secondary education in the United States is about $10,000. So you're talking roughly around 30% less on a per student basis.
Yeah, that's interesting. And with numbers like that, it would seem that this is an industry that's probably ready for some sort of unfettering, right? And it's just a matter of how that's going to happen, not if, but how and when. So I'll throw it to you for a last word here.
Well, one of the things we haven't talked about are the teachers. And in talking to high school teachers, what I find is that generally speaking, they're a very creative and dedicated bunch who feel, and this is anecdotal, but of the ones I've spoken to, feel constrained by the system, that they'd like to do more and try more innovative things in the classroom, but they're constrained by the very same bureaucracy on their end that's constraining the parents' choice on the parents' side.
So I guess we're just going to have to take a wait-and-see approach, but all the pieces seem to be in place for us.
Right.
So that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Be sure to come back next Wednesday at about noon Eastern Time for another episode. Until then, check out all the great content at fee.org and at Fee Online. Till next week, Ant, we'll catch you later.
See you next week, James.